Afternoon, everyone. Third day in a row. I do not have any opening remarks, so
Oh my gosh,
Matt,
really? There's
I've-
nothing going on in the world
I have
that
wanted-
you would like to opine on?
I have wanted
without-
to, I have wanted to come in here 3 days in a row and talk about the University of Texas road win against the Alabama Crimson Tide on Saturday night, a big upset, but I decided that maybe that's not the best use of this
Okay, I
podium.
thought you were from Utah.
Utah.
No.
You say you thought I was from Utah?
Yeah.
Texas.
I thought
Texas. The University of Texas. UT. Different UT.
Hook 'em.
Hook 'em horns.
Okay, all right, well, and thank you for not going into the Bills-Jets game. I wanted to go back to the Iran stuff that we were talking about yesterday, and the assertion from the administration that billions of dollars in escrow accounts had been sent back or withdrawn by Iran during the previous administration without any restrictions at all. Do you have any more?
Yeah, all I'll say is, so after the previous administration withdrew from the JCPOA and reestablished or reactivated these accounts, they did not set up any procedures to give the U.S. government either visibility or oversight into how the money was being spent. Now, look, that wasn't required by law, but we have decided.
Well, in fact, it was, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't required by law
What-
that they set up
Yeah, but it was required by U.S. law, by law that was signed by the president, several presidents, that any money in these accounts be spent on for only humanitarian
It's
purposes.
not, well, no, that's not quite accurate. It could be humanitarian or other non-sanctionable activities. So there are 2 points.
Well,
2
okay.
points. So they could, 2 points. One, the
So they could buy some
Iranians
Snickers bars,
could
okay,
go back-
non-humanitarian, but.
non-humanitarian, other non-sanctionable activities. But I think the larger point I was making, without direct visibility and without a mechanism for oversight, you are largely asking to trust the Iranians, which is not something that we are willing to do for a number of reasons, which is why when we are setting up these accounts or setting up the regime for these accounts in Qatar, we are setting up visibility and oversight mechanisms so we have clear visibility into how the money is being spent and have the ability to oversee it and take action if it's being spent
Yeah,
for
but-
non-humanitarian measures.
Okay, so I'm still pressing for details about how many billions were taken out of India and Turkey and Japan and South Korea that the Iranians were able to spend on, willy-nilly.
So we don't have perfect visibility into this question because of the situation I just outlined, which is we don't have visibility into the accounts and how they were being used.
So you
We
don't
do,
know.
well, let me just say, we do have information that has led us to conclude that they were spent down by billions of dollars, in some cases all the way to zero, but we do not have perfect visibility
which
about
cases were they spent
the,
all the way down to zero?
I don't have specific details on that.
Okay, it's my understanding that, in fact, these countries, particularly India, South Korea, and Japan, were well aware of OFAC restrictions on the escrow funds, on the funds that they were holding in escrow, and would not give the Iranians anything unless it was, specifically approved and sent through either the failed European Instex exchange or then the almost failed Swiss humanitarian channel.
Two
Is
things.
that incorrect?
First of all, those aren't the only countries. China is another country that had one of these accounts.
Well, you know what?
But
when was the last time the Chinese, obeyed U.S. sanctions or
that's my point.
respected them?
No,
I'm talking about countries like
I know, and
India.
I'm about to.
India had the largest amount,
And I'm
with
about
the
to
exception of maybe
get to
China.
that.
Okay.
I can't speak to the other countries' procedures, but what I can say is, from our perspective, we think it's important that the United States government itself have direct visibility and direct oversight of these transactions, which is why we insisted on it as part of these negotiations.
Okay, and so your direct transparency, your direct visibility into the accounts that still are in South Korea, Japan, India, Turkey, how much are left in those?
That's the same. We do not have direct visibility. We do not know with any sort of
You just
fidelity.
said your whole point was that
With the
you
account
wanna
that's
have-
being set- that we wanna have with the account that's being set up in
What you
Qatar.
did when you came in was to get direct visibility, and now
We
you're
are getting,
telling
no,
me
no, we are getting
that
direct.
you don't have any visibility.
No, that's not what I said. I'm saying we
Well-
are able to set up this new account in Qatar. We are able to set it up under rules that allow us to have direct visibility into how the transactions
well,
are
I'm
being,
talking
or how
about
the money's being spent.
But the claim that was made on Monday and Tuesday was that when this administration came in, you set up these specific rules and restrictions on how these funds being held in escrow could be used, so that you would have direct visibility into it. And now you're saying that the previous administration allowed billions of dollars to go to Iran without any restrictions on them. But the visibility that you say that you got 3 years ago, you don't have, because you can't tell me, or Treasury can't say how much, or, I guess we could go to India, Japan, China, and Turkey and ask them. I don't know that they'll tell us. But if you don't know how much is left in these accounts, for sure, you're just guessing, aren't you? At saying that they've all been depleted?
It is not just, it is not, in some cases we have very low visibility, in some cases we have better visibility, which leads us to believe that the billions have been spent, and in some cases we believe.
Okay, well, where's the better visibility, and how much is left in those accounts?
That's what I said,
and how much did the Iranians get out during the previous administration? Well, if you can't say that, how can you make the I don't understand how you can.
Because there is some information that we have available to us with good fidelity, and that's what I've been able to provide, and others that we don't.
Well, with good fidelity, what does that mean? That you suspect that someone emptied
No,
a bank
it means
account?
the statement I said that we can see that they've
a
spent down
bank
billions.
account at, M&T Bank, right, and draw it down to zero, you should be able to tell, or someone should be able to tell if it was at zero or not, right? Why can't you tell? I don't understand.
These are not accounts held in the United States.
I know,
So we do not have perfect visibility into them.
Partner. Japan and South Korea are treaty allies of the United States. How do you not know how much is left in these accounts?
With respect to some accounts, we are able to see. We've not. I do not have all of those details available. With some accounts, we do not have perfect visibility. What we can see is that billions of dollars were spent down without any U.S. government visibility or oversight at the time that money was being spent.
I don't understand how you can say that without knowing how much is in the accounts.
We have a variety of ways to gather information.
So do I, and one of them is talking to former administration officials who say this never, one of them is talking to former people who were in office during the time that what you said would say was happening, and they say it didn't happen. And they say there was only a very small amount that was sent to Iran, and it was for humanitarian purposes, and it was through mainly the Swiss humanitarian channel, which only succeeded in apparently one or two very small transactions in the tens of thousands of dollars. And then there was also Instex, which completely failed and didn't do anything. So I'll drop it.
I take their claims, but that is just not the information that we have. Go ahead.
Does somebody else want to pursue Iran? Could I switch topics?
If I may.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah. Let me just to North Korea, actually. With Putin and Kim Jong-un meeting. I know there have been comments on that previously, but could you say particularly there's the Russians are talking about satellite cooperation? What would that mean? How much of a concern is that in terms of the implications for North Korea's program and for Russia's military?
I would say it is troubling when you see the Russians talking about cooperating with North Korea on programs that would violate UN Security Council resolutions that Russia itself voted for. Now, we obviously don't, we haven't seen the full manifestation of this meeting yet, or what the full outcomes of this meeting will be. But when you see the two, when you see Kim Jong-un vowing to provide full unconditional support for Russia's so-called sacred fight to defend its security interests, which of course is not what it's doing with respect to the war in Ukraine, that of course is troubling. When you see what looks to be increased cooperation and probably military transfers, as we've said for some time, we have reason to believe they were going to discuss military transfers. That is quite troubling and would potentially be in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions.
You say potentially. I mean, one of the things that they're mentioning is on the satellite specifically. I know you said you don't have the full manifest of what's going on, but in terms of what, I mean, the United States has said that the satellite program that North Korea has is used to develop ballistic missiles.
Exactly.
Is that a concern that Russia could be actively promoting, improving the North Korean ballistic missile.
Absolutely. That's why that was what I was referring to in my reference to the multiple UN Security Council resolutions against North Korea's ballistic missile program, which Russia itself voted for and now could potentially be violating.
Okay, just one more.
Yeah,
I mean, just
yeah.
in terms of the consequences, I think Jake Sullivan himself has said that there's a potential for, not to put words into it, potential for sanctions, for further actions on this. What is the United States looking at? I mean, is there the potential for some action on the basis of this?
So we're going to watch very closely what comes out of this. I spoke to this somewhat the other day. We're looking at, I will say there are two different possibilities of weapons flowing two different ways here, right? With respect to either direction, we would watch very closely and be concerned, and will not hesitate to impose sanctions if and when it's appropriate. And then I want to speak specifically for a second about the idea of North Korea providing weapons to Russia, which I spoke to the other day, but I don't think you were here. One, just the overall context. I think it's important to restate again that a year and a half ago, Vladimir Putin launched this war thinking he was going to restore the glory of the Russian Empire, failed in all of his maximalist imperialist aims, and now a year and a half later, after losing tens of thousands of Russian soldiers and spending billions and billions of dollars, here he is begging Kim Jong-un for help. So it says something about the overall context of how this war is going for Russia. And with respect to what any outcomes might be, we have taken a number of actions already to sanction entities that have brokered arms sales between North Korea and Russia, and we won't hesitate to impose additional actions if appropriate. She raised her hand. Go ahead. We'll get to you, Saeed.
Has there been any interaction between U.S. officials and Chinese officials on this matter, given it would likely be a concern of Beijing if Russia were to provide nuclear technology to?
Not that I'm aware of. Not aware of any specific interaction. But the meeting just happened today, so I wouldn't rule it out. And we do have somewhat regular engagements with Chinese officials going forward. We have, I will say, the Secretary Blinken raised North Korea's nuclear program and North Korea's ballistic missile program in his engagements with Chinese officials when we were in Beijing, and we regularly raise that in our conversations with Chinese officials because of the close relationship that China has had with North Korea, that if they're willing to play a productive role, they're able to, and they have some influence with the regime in North Korea. So I would anticipate we would raise it, but I'm not aware of any specific interactions that have taken place yet.
You can meet with whoever the Chinese delegation leader is at UNGA next week.
I don't have any specific meetings to announce yet, but stay tuned over the course of the next couple of days. Janie, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Two questions on North Korea. North Korea launched the two ballistic missiles into the East Sea yesterday ahead of the North Korea-Russia summit. What do you think is the intention behind this?
So I won't speak to their intentions. Always tough getting in the mind of that regime in particular, but I will say that the United States condemns the DPRK's recent ballistic missile launches, as we have condemned their previous ballistic missile launches. The launches are in violation of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions and are the latest in the series of launches that pose a direct threat to the DPRK's neighbors. They undermine regional security, and our commitment to the defense of the Republic of Korea and Japan remain ironclad.
President Putin and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un are further strengthening their military cooperation at the talks. How will the United States choose a diplomatic or military approach to resolve the North Korean nuclear and missile issues in the future?
We have always made clear that we are ready for diplomacy, are open to diplomacy, would welcome diplomacy with North Korea to address our concerns about its nuclear weapons program. And to date, as I believe you're well aware, they have shown no interest in such diplomacy.
So you still expect to dialogue with North Korea? Dialogue is still open.
Did you say I expected?
Yeah, expect.
I do not. I do not get based on their behavior over the last 2.5 years. No, I would not expect them to engage in diplomacy with us, just based on how they've reacted for the first 2.5 years, over 2.5 years now of this administration. But the door always remains open from our side.
Thank you.
Said, go
I
ahead.
was just curious as to why you guys insist on using the term begging, like he's going cap in hand. Well, in fact, it was the North Korean leader who was visiting Russia. Russia is a vast country. He's invited him and so on. And according to what we know, most of North Korea's equipment, military equipment, is basically Russian made. But why the term?
I don't think that at the beginning of this war, Vladimir Putin would have anticipated that a year and a half in, he would having to be scrounging around. He would have to be scrounging around. Sorry, let me finish. He would have to be scrounging around the world, including with international pariahs like Kim Jong Un, asking for assistance, and potentially in return having to provide assistance to the DPRK that would violate UN Security Council resolutions that Russia itself voted for. So, I mean, you can use whatever word you want to characterize it,
could
but
be
I will stand by the words I
I'll
use.
scratch your back kind of a thing. No, that's not begging, is it?
I stand by my characterization. Michelle, go ahead.
On Bahrain, on the meetings that you just had, this human rights activist, Mariam Al-Khawaja, I'm sorry, I'm butchering her name, is heading back there to raise the profile of her father's case. I wonder if the secretary raised that in his meetings today.
The meeting is ongoing right now as we speak, so I can't speak to obviously what happened in the meeting that is ongoing. But we do regularly raise human rights concerns with countries around the world, including specific human rights cases. The secretary regularly does that as part of his engagements, but again, I don't know what's happened in a meeting that's
And one other
going on right
human
now.
rights question: has the administration decided what it's going to do with aid to Egypt?
We have not made a formal determination as of yet, but I think, as you know, the deadline for that is approaching relatively soon.
Could we just follow on Bahrain?
Yeah.
I know you said it's ongoing, but in terms of what was signed today, what in substantive terms will change with the U.S. relationship with Bahrain? I mean, the Fifth Fleet is already there, and the Secretary spoke about intelligence cooperation. What changes after today?
So, two things, or three things. First, as you know, we already have a substantial security relationship with Bahrain. What we believe this agreement represents first, or second, I guess, if I've made the first background point, a new framework to enhance cooperation across a wide range of areas, from defense and security to emerging technology, trade, and investment. We believe it's the latest manifestation of that enduring commitment that we've shown to Bahrain and to the region in support of peace. And then I think the last point I would make about it is that this is a bilateral agreement between the United States and Bahrain, but we see it as potentially the cornerstone for cooperation among a broader group of countries that share mutual interests and a common vision with respect to deterrence, diplomacy, and escalation. So, Alex, go ahead.
I have a Ukraine-related question, but before I go back to Iran, if I may, we discussed in this room yesterday, also today, Kirby also mentioned that if Iran violates the let's say, the deal, we will just lock it down, so we will not send that funding. It goes back to Matt's question. Can you please give us the timetable of the transaction process? What's going to look like? How many tranches will be sent? 6 billion will be divided. And at what point you will be able to weigh in? And do you have established mechanism to lock it down?
I am not going to get into the exact details of the transactions as they move from South Korea through banks in Europe, ultimately to these end accounts in Qatar. But we expect in the coming days or so that that money will move ultimately to the final destination in Qatar. With respect to the mechanisms that are available to us, we have complete visibility into these accounts and have the ability to lock them down if we see Iran attempting to take actions that are in violation of this agreement and in violation of our sanctions. I'm not going to get into what the exact technical details are, but we have the full agreement to stop their access to this account going forward.
Thank you. About more Iran, Mahsa Act just passed Congress yesterday. As you know, it demands the administration to sanction Iran's human rights violators, particularly leaders of Iran. Do you find it appropriate that, I know this is not a law yet, so they will be set aside and the presidential signature is necessary, but Congress already have expressed its will. Do you find it appropriate that right when Iranian people are going through this painful process, this first anniversary of Mahsa Amini's murder, do you find it appropriate that the butcher of Iran will not only be allowed to enter the United States territory, but also will be welcomed by local human rights, local NGOs, such as Council of Foreign Relations, led by former administration officials? How appropriate is that?
So I will just say that as has been longstanding precedent has happened under, going back really since the UN was founded and based in New York, we have an obligation as the host country to admit representatives of other countries, no matter what we think of those countries' policies, and that has long been the case as our obligation of the United Nations. With respect to the President of Iran being hosted at a think tank in New York, I won't speak to that in particular. They're obviously an independent organization that can make their own decisions, but I would say that when any organization hosts such a figure with a long history of spreading mistruths and saying things that are making claims that are not accurate, we would just urge them to watch very carefully what he says, make sure they hold him accountable, make sure that their members have full access to truthful, accurate information. And I would expect that they would do that.
And the fact that
So one more, and then I'm going to move
Thanks so
around.
much. The fact that we passed the House, will that change your calculus on the end in terms of sanctioning Iran's supreme leader before it becomes a law?
I'm just not going to preview any specific sanctions.
Please come back to
designations.
later on
What-
Ukraine.
let me go to
previous-
Olivia.
But the answer that you gave just prior to that was about Raisi speaking at
CFR, yeah.
So back in the previous administration, there had been restrictions placed on Iranian diplomats going to New York, which limited their movements to between their mission or residence and the UN itself. Now, recognizing that Manhattan is not exactly in a huge area, still CFR is outside of what the range, what the perimeter had been for them before. I recognize that shortly after this administration took office, you guys rescinded those restrictions. But there are people who are saying that they should be reenacted, particularly since the election of Raisi, which happened after that. Is there any consideration being given to going back to the previous administration's restrictions on Iranian
Not that I'm aware
diplomatic
of.
movements?
Not
No? And then secondly, on Iran at the UN, I believe it's October 8th that under the JCPOA, which is, on life support, if it still can be said to be on life support, the UN arms embargo will be lifted. And there is a growing call, bipartisan call in Congress for there to be a snapback of sanctions, something that the administration has opposed. Are you prepared now to change your position, or you still think it would be okay for the arms embargo to be to disappear?
Matt, let me look into that. I'm not focused on with things that have still a month to go before we get there. It's a fair question. I'll just have to look into an answer.
Well, maybe you should be focused on it, because
A number of topics I deal with every day at this
I
briefing,
know,
and typically
I know.
things.
Well, so-
My time horizon can typically be shorter than a month
so do all
on
of
things
us.
I'm
We
preparing
have
for.
a-
Yeah,
we have
I
a-
understand.
yeah.
Olivia, go ahead.
What can you tell us about the purpose and circumstances of Ambassador Tracy's visit with Paul Whalen? Has that meeting already happened? Was it at our request? Is there a readout of the visit overall?
Sure. So Ambassador Tracy did meet with Paul Whalen earlier today. It was a consular visit. We believe Paul continues to show tremendous courage in the face of his wrongful detention. Ambassador Tracy reiterated to him that President Biden and Secretary Blinken are committed to bring him home. You may recall Secretary Blinken had a phone call with Paul Whalen around a month ago, a little under a month ago, where he delivered that same message to him, that we are working very hard to bring him home, and we will continue to do so.
separately, but maybe relatedly, can you confirm these reports that have emerged that Russian interlocutors have specifically raised the case of Vadim Krasikov in potential prisoner swap negotiations?
I cannot, and I will say, as we have said a number of times, we have found that when it comes to our efforts to bring home these wrongfully detained Americans, the substance of negotiations and what we're trying to do to bring them home and any specifics, it's oftentimes not helpful to our effort to speak to those publicly, so I can't do so here.
Absent from concrete conversations about his case, is his case something that the U.S. would consider in a potential swap? And if so, have you raised it with the Germans?
I'm just not gonna speak at all. Obviously, we have shown that we are, we are willing to make tough decisions because we believe it is so important to bring Americans home, but that is a general statement. I don't want to speak to any specific individual that might be detained in the U.S. or in another country. So, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask about, regarding Mexico, what can President Biden do to stop the sex trafficking of children coming across our border from Mexico, especially in the state of California? And I have a follow-up.
Well, we have, obviously, let me try to speak to what this department's work is, which is to counter human trafficking, and we have taken a number of steps to do that, but with respect to specific border operations, I would prefer you to the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, and finally, what is the Biden administration response to the Sound of Freedom movie that highlights the international child sex trafficking problem as a horrific problem?
I'm not familiar with that specific movie. Obviously, as I said, we've taken a number of actions to counter child trafficking around the world, but I wouldn't want to comment on that specific movie. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. The Kurdistan Regional Government, in a letter, has appealed to President Biden and this administration to intervene in a deepening crisis between Erbil and Baghdad. They also urged the administration to mediate between Erbil and Baghdad for their disputes. How do you view this KRG request and letter, and will you mediate or increase your engagement between Erbil and Baghdad to overcome these disputes?
So I'm not going to discuss diplomatic correspondence between the president and the KRG, but I will reiterate, as we did in the February U.S.-Iraq Higher Coordinating Committee in Washington, that we continue to urge the government of Iraq and KRG officials to resolve their budget disputes in a manner that benefits the Iraqi citizens as the Iraqi Constitution requires.
Thank you very much. You had told me to ask the ambassador of the U.S. in Islamabad, so I asked him about his meeting with the Election Commission chief. He did not answer me, just sent me the press release back, which he had issued in August, that U.S. wants to see fair elections being held and stuff like that. But what hurted me, Matt, and you are in the position to answer that when I asked him that, Mr. Ambassador, do you think since last 1 year the relationship between human-to-human relations of America and Pakistan towards America, do you think it has improved or it has decreased? If I can't even get an answer for this much question, then what is diplomacy about?
I will answer the question this way, as I have said, I believe before, in response to similar questions, that Pakistan is an important partner of ours, and we greatly value the relationship between our countries, both between our two governments and the people-to-people connections.
Matt, one question about Afghanistan. Pakistan and Afghanistan are having border issues on Torkham since last few days. Thousands of people are stranded. What is the U.S. position on that?
Obviously, we would encourage those two governments to work together to resolve that issue. Go ahead. I gotta get to other people in the room.
From News. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall has requested testimony from 3 Biden administration spokespersons, including our dear friend Ned Price, on the chaotic troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. Will state encourage Price testimony before the House committee?
So we obviously are in receipt of that request. Chairman McCall has asked for interviews with a number of officials from the State Department and has asked for a number of documents. We have provided hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of documents with respect to his inquiries in this regard. We will continue to cooperate with his committee to provide the information that it needs. We have already provided interviews with a number of officials and will continue to do so as appropriate and when appropriate, balancing the House's need to get information that it needs to do its job with our ability to protect certain privileges that the executive branch holds. But I wouldn't want to speak to any potential interview other than to say that we'll continue to work through these questions with the committee.
So the chairman committee also claim that these administration spokesperson misled the American people during the run-up to the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, painting a far rosier picture than the reality on the ground. So my question is that are these spokesperson or you, are they responsible for these statements he's referring? Because, I mean, are you just doing your job or, or somebody else is responsible for these kind of statements?
I don't want to get into that in detail, other than to say, I was not here inside the government at the time, but I do believe what the government has said at a number of occasions is that the situation changed very rapidly in a way that could not be anticipated.
So one last question, sir.
So,
President of Pakistan.
Hold, everyone, chill.
Someone
Go ahead.
last.
One more.
President of Pakistan proposes November 6th as the election date. As according to the constitution, election should be held in 90 days. But election commissions of Pakistan said it is not able to hold elections in that short notice. Looks like another constitutional crisis in Pakistan. Your thoughts on that?
As we do with countries around the world, we urge Pakistan to hold a free and fair and timely elections and to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. And we urge Pakistani authorities to move forward with the electoral process in a manner consistent with Pakistan's laws, as we do with countries around the world. Saeed, go ahead.
Today marks the 30th anniversary of the Oslo Accord that was so famously signed on the White House lawn. It called for a Palestinian state by 1998. Of course, that date is gone. The situation is a lot worse today. Settlement spreading. You're fully aware of what's going on, and I'm wondering whether the time has come to really pull the plug on these accords and perhaps pursue something entirely different. Maybe, list loftier goals or something that the United States can lead.
So we don't believe so. We continue to focus on our efforts on affirmative and practical steps that could promote a negotiated two-state solution, but at the same time, we believe it's important to advance equal measures of freedom and dignity as a means to advance further a negotiated two-state solution.
Do you believe that the elements or the components for a two-state solution are still there? It can be done?
I believe that it is important to, let me refer to something the Secretary said when he was asked, or when he spoke to this in a speech in December 2022. He spoke to this exactly. He said, "We know at this moment the prospects of a two-state solution feel remote." And that may be an understatement to some. I believe you would agree with those remarks based on what you said. So, but we are committed to providing, or to preserving, a horizon of hope. And that means holding firm to the values that have anchored the friendship between the United States and Israel across countless transitions in government in both of our countries. So the two-state solution has long been the United States policy, and it continues to be our policy that we will push for, and we believe it's important to do so.
So why not, if you're still committed to the two-state solution, ultimately, why not recognize a state of Palestine, saying that we would like to see this state of Palestine on such and such land, this land that was occupied or a portion thereof, and so on. And in the meantime, these things ought to be negotiated among the parties.
We don't believe that'd be a productive step at this time.
So, just,
Yeah.
you talked about the Secretary saying that in December 2022. Since he made those comments, children who were not even conceived yet have been born. Do you think you're further away or closer today to a two-state solution?
I don't think I want to make a judgment about further or closer, other than to say, again, it remains our policy and something we regularly push for in dialogue with officials from the government.
And then secondly, and I don't think you'll have a lot on this, but the case of Elizabeth Surkov, who is this Israeli-Russian citizen who's been being held in Iraq, but who has connections to the U.S. Do you have anything more on that?
I don't. I'm happy to look into it further, see if there's more.
Matt, just a quick question on the visa waiver. Just
Yeah.
a quick follow-up. Is the U.S. still committed to ensuring Israel adherence to the principle of blue is blue prior to admission of the U.S. visa waiver program?
I will say is that we are if by blue, you're referring to blue passports,
Yes,
is that what you mean?
absolutely, yeah, blue. I
We
mean,
are-
that's what they call, you guys call it.
We are committed to the principle that all American citizens be treated equally, yes. Work some of this. Go ahead, Jim.
Is it still the case that Morocco has not put forward a formal request for U.S. assistance in the wake of that?
I do have an update on conversations with the government of Morocco and our actions with respect to relief efforts in Morocco. One is that the United States Agency for International Development has deployed a small assessment team to Morocco to liaise with local responders, assessing the situation and identifying humanitarian needs. And second, that we are exchanging specialized technical expertise through the United States Geological Survey. And we continue to be further in close consultation with the Moroccan government on how the U.S. can best support their efforts to provide a humanitarian response to this tragedy.
Have they rejected any U.S. offers of assistance?
I wouldn't frame it that way. I would frame it that we are in discussions with them about what we can best provide to support their efforts.
So, a very quick follow-up.
Yeah.
The US aid statement is talking about $1 million in support. Does that mean to local groups or to people there? It won't be Americans?
I would refer to USAID for the specifics on how that money will be used.
Could I stay in Africa?
Yeah.
Mali, there's an attack today purportedly by Tuareg separatists. Generally speaking, I mean, what's the concern level about the new flare-up of violence in Mali and the departure of the UN peacekeepers and the presence of Wagner there? To what extent are those factors?
We continue to be concerned both with the situation on the ground in Mali and with the presence of Wagner, or whatever you call the remnants of Wagner, after the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin. We believe that they're a destabilizing force in a country that did not need further destabilization. Go ahead.
Thanks. So last week, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made some comments on kind of what precipitated the war in Ukraine, and I'll just quote him here. President Putin declared in autumn of 2021 and actually sent a draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent to us, and it was a precondition to not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. So I'm just wondering, there were also some remarks by Councilor Blinken last year that the
Secretary
U.S.
Blinken?
Secretary Blinken made
I didn't know
that-
if you meant Councilor Chalet, or, you know, I misspeak enough that I am not faulting you for having done so, trust me.
But Blinken apparently expressed a similar sentiment. So I'm just wondering, in hindsight of what has transpired in the war, whether that decision was worth it, and maybe what was behind that decision.
So I'm not going to speak to what were private diplomatic conversations. I will reiterate what we said at the time, which was NATO has an open door policy, and we were not willing to compromise NATO's open door policy, nor do we believe it is appropriate to compromise NATO open door policy, nor is NATO in any way a threat to Russia. NATO was then and is now a defensive alliance. We always made clear in the run-up to that war that we were willing to engage in diplomacy with Russia. The Ukrainians made clear that they were willing to engage in diplomacy with Russia about legitimate regional security concerns. But we were not going to compromise one of NATO's founding principles, and I certainly don't believe NATO or that Ukraine, although I won't speak for them, Ukraine did not seem to want to compromise their own right to determine their future as a country.
And
Go ahead.
Can I just get one quick
Yeah.
follow-up? So when you weigh that, one is weighing that open door policy with the horrible consequences of the war, which Stoltenberg cites as one of Russia's primary negotiating points, and then two is, do you not see any security concern, even if it is a defensive alliance, a security concern with NATO members often hold U.S. military assets on their territory. So is there not a concern from not wanting that on your border if you're kind of one of our adversaries like China or Russia?
I will just say, I think you might be being, with all due respect, a little too incredulous with respect to your treatment of statements reported and offers reported to be made by Vladimir Putin. What we believe, and what we believe has borne out, and some of the reason we believe this is because it's what Vladimir Putin said himself, is that he has never believed Ukraine was a legitimate country, and he always wanted to restore Ukraine, not restore, he wanted to make Ukraine a part of Russia. He's said that openly. His actions indicated that's what he believed, and that's what his actions today continue to show he still believes. Go ahead. No, go ahead. gonna work around. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Just real quickly, do you have any comment on the appointment of Ms. Kamikawa as the new Foreign Minister of Japan? And are there any plans set for Secretary Blinken to speak with her?
I'm sure he will speak with her in the coming days, as he regularly does when new foreign ministers are appointed. The U.S.-Japan relationship has never been stronger. Our alliance is a cornerstone of peace, security, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and across the world. Our government has had an excellent working relationship with the previous cabinet, and we fully expect close coordination on bilateral, regional, and global issues to continue with the new cabinet. Go ahead.
Thank you. China yesterday appointed a new ambassador to Afghanistan under Taliban's regime. I would like to ask you what's your reaction and whether the United States will take such a step in the near future or not.
I don't have any reaction to the Chinese government's decision to do that, and I don't have any announcements to make with respect to what we will do. Alex, go ahead, and then we'll finish off.
I have two questions on Russia's annexation policy you just were talking about. G7 today came up with a statement on sham elections, condemned the action.
Secretary put one out last week as well.
The Secretary also put it prior to the election, and he also pledged that there will be sanctions against individuals who take part of it, which raised high expectations. Are they too high at this point?
No.
When should we expect sanctions?
I never preview those, but those elections only closed, I think, on Friday, and today's Wednesday, so it takes some time to put these things into effect.
So G7 statement is not enough. So, it's not your, let's say, final.
I am not going to announce or preview any sanctions. You've probably gotten used to hearing me say this. Any preview or announce any sanctions determinations before they are made.
Fair enough. Now that sham election is over, we have seen Russia is stepping up a little bit with its annexation strategy, bullying other countries, in this case Azerbaijan, for not recognizing Russia's quote-unquote territorial integrity and by condemning, not respecting, let's say, the elections. Do you have any reaction?
Look, Russia has proved through a number of actions in recent years that it is not a neighbor you can really trust on to be a peaceful, tranquil, stable neighbor that respects territorial integrity and sovereignty, and I would think every country in the region should be aware of that.
But the fact that they are going out and talking about their territorial integrity by pitching Ukrainian territory to other countries, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I did, and I stand by the comment I made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.